everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on how the world can stop next pandemic. We have our world famous speaker Mr. Martley and Mr. Daniel. First I would like to give chance Mr. Martley.
Well, like you said, a lot of people are paying attention to the pandemic, and a lot of people are saying that we are out of the pandemic in the sense of the coronavirus. But as Daniel and you both know, there are new variations that are constantly out there, and definitely it is a continual battle. And definitely there is even talk of new things that could be out there in all of that space. And most of the world, from what I am hearing and what I am reading, doesn't think that we are ready for the next one should it happen, and it will probably happen sooner versus than later, because definitely a lot of people were glad to see the shutdowns, but there were also a number of people that were frustrated by those shutdowns. And if there is another pandemic, I don't know that the global shutdowns will be as well received as they were the first time around, and all in that space, because a lot of people lost money, lost opportunities, lost a number of other things in that space. But I'd love to hear Daniel's thoughts as well. But definitely that is a concern. And a lot of people are wondering whether some of those things that were done, like the wearing of the mask and a number of other things, are things that cause more harm than they did good. And even have some people that are questioning the effectiveness of the vaccines and all along those lines. So there are a lot of things that people are wondering about and still have questions about as well. So that is definitely the conversation that is going on. I do know that one thing that I was glad to see that happened is that at least here in Durham, where I'm at, and it is a Research Triangle Park area, there is mass transit, and that's how I get around. And the mass transit just recently voted that they will continue to be free, because for a number of years it was continuously rising. I think when I first started riding the bus and I get around by the bus, it might have been somewhere like 50 cents or something like that. It might have even been cheaper. And then by the time that I was not having to pay for it, I think it was up to somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.50, $2, or somewhere in that range. And I don't remember the exact fees, but I know it was definitely up there. And if you wanted to go out of the city, it was definitely even further out there. And you still have to pay if you're going to go on a Greyhound or a Trailways. But in terms of the city bus, they voted to go till the next fiscal year, which will be in 2024. And so there was to remain free. And it was free in Chapel Hill, where UNC is, all of this time. But in the other bigger urban areas, it was not free, but it will remain free for at least another year. And I don't know if that's the same kind of thing that they're doing where Daniel is, but Daniel may have some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think they did make the local bus lines free. I think they're still free. They don't get a lot of riders anyway here in Thousand Oaks. And that was definitely in the calculation for the government response. So the topic on how to prevent the next pandemic is an important one. I just think that our former president actually dismantled a whole bunch of infrastructure on response, and it was exactly the worthy time to do that. But these are these that have to be addressed on a worldwide basis when they break out, because germs don't know from borders. They just flow in the air. They flow through various vectors and routes. So it's like something that requires a unified response. Like if you have a captain of a ship, you got to have in charge with the ultimate authority. You can't have a bunch, 200 different captains arguing while the ship's about to plow into about the boat-eating rocks, as my sailing teacher used to call them. But the boat-eating rocks are out there, and we have to make sure our authority, our irrigation systems are able to prevent the worst outcomes. So I did take an online course through Johns Hopkins University during the last pandemic. They were offering, it was about an 8-hour online class to become a trace and track certified tracer or tracker. I think they called it.
Contact tracer. I took the course as well, and all in that space. I actually didn't do any of the contact tracing, but I did pass the course and actually did some other work that was similar, but not in that same field. But yeah, I took the contact tracing course and learned of what you should say or not say and how to
Right.
fire and all of that, and was certified to do it. I just didn't do any of that work for whatever reasons and all along those lines. But definitely, I had that opportunity. And ironically, Daniel, the company that I work for, or one of them, is a testing company, an educational assessment testing company here that does it for a lot of the parts of the United States. I know we've done things in the Northeast, things in the West, and a number of other places as part of the Common Core. But during the time of things being slowed down in the testing world, they actually did some packaging. So I think that was about a year and a half, 2 years ago, that I was actually packaging some of those kits. So while I did not actually do any of the contact tracing that you're talking about, I did work, I think, about a year, maybe a year and a half, doing some of the packaging of those kits that go out that folks can test with the nasal swabs and all into that space. So it was interesting making sure that they were packaged correctly, and then they were shipped off to the various parts of not just the United States, but probably various parts of the world as well. And, one of the things I wonder about, and Sharif had said that we were going to talk about the pandemic, is that there is a fear, and I think it is not an unreasonable fear, that some of these pandemics are not so much intentional, but that they may have done some stuff in the labs that might even have some intentional consequences. I don't know so much about coronavirus, since apparently that came out of Wuhan or other things, but there are definitely folks that have looked at Ebola in Africa. They have looked at AIDS even, which was definitely considered a pandemic as well, or at least an epidemic. And if I'm remembering my terminology correctly, and there were definitely folks that thought that it was deliberately set there in the African continents and all in that space. So that's one of the things that I'm sure that the folks in the third world countries and even the second world countries are worried about, is how much of the kind of things that go on in biology and these kind of biological things are intentionally done, whether that is biological warfare or whether that is population control or whether that is a number of other things. So you do have some folks that are concerned about that. I haven't seen anything that is 100% credible, but it does make you at least ponder and wonder what is going on in that space.
Yeah, I've heard the term pandemic. I mean, bandied about in so-called conspiracy circles, right? But you can't. I don't want to add too much fuel to that fire, but you have to say that the global elites, like the Bilderbergs, and they do circulate white papers that say, look, this population overshoot, we're going to have to get that population drawn down. And that would be a way to do it with plausible deniability. And we know that bad actors have been working on various biological depopulation ideas. I think even the Nazis were trying to come up with something that would selectively check the races, the so-called races that they didn't like. Actually, race is a social construct. It's not a genetic one, which I think is why that plan didn't, because we all are the same Homo sapiens species who have superficial differences, but they don't make you a different species, and they don't let you target ethnotype differences. I don't think. Maybe they can. I don't know. Maybe they.
Yeah, well, I don't think they do either. But even in the 21st century, and I know it's getting off the beaten path of the conversation, but definitely there have been a lot of ethnic divides that have happened, and not just here in America, but throughout the world. You can look at Bosnia, you can look at parts of Africa, you can look at a number of other places. So that is something that has definitely been out there. I am one that believes in folks having cultural pride, and definitely think that that is a wonderful thing, whether you are proud of your native roots, your German roots, your African American roots, your various Hispanic roots, because to say Hispanic is not fair, because there are various parts of that culture, and it includes many different cultures and countries, and they all have different aspects of their culture that can be common, but also some that can be different. The food from Belize is not necessarily the food from Mexico, and the music from let's say Venezuela is not necessarily the music of Brazil, and that's just some of the things that can be different in that cultural lane. But a lot of people, I think, take the ethnic pride too far, and that's kind of what you were alluding to, Daniel, and everything. So I think you can be proud of your ethnicities, but there are a lot of folks that are wanting to mutually exclude other people that are not part of whatever their ethnic group is, and that's when you have things like ethnic cleansing and other things that go on throughout the world. And there are people in part of that pandemic crowd that would say that that is part of what was being done, was intentional groups being targeted. And I've heard that same thing about AIDS and other things as well. And like I said, the proof is in the pudding and everything. I haven't seen anybody that has released stuff that is making that concretely clear as to whether that happened or not. But there are a lot of theories about what is going on, even with the multinationals and others. But I don't know about you, but I don't travel in those circles, so I don't know about those secret papers and those secret meetings. And I've never joined the Elks or any of the other fraternal groups that might have those secret codes or have the access to the secret codes. And I don't know that I would want to join those groups. I had a hard enough time being recruited by frats when I was in college, and chose to turn down both of the frats, including the one that my roommate at the time was on, because anytime you put hot sauce on parts of the body that I don't think hot sauce belongs on and everything, then I'm not trying to join that and everything. I don't know about you, Daniel, but when he came here and he might have been just doing a scare tactic, but when he told me that they were placing hot sauce on parts of the body, then I'm not even trying to have my lady love when I have one of those. And right now I'm between. But if I have one of those, I'm not trying to even have them put hot sauce on certain parts of the body.
Well, it was on the Georgia Guidestones, keep the population under 500 million. So of course, they blew up the Georgia Guidestones because someone thought, oh my God, this is the New World Order trying to kill 10% of the humans on Earth. No, it's a guideline. There's nothing wrong with being in harmony with nature. There's lots of ways to do it. But I think the word race actually didn't start getting widely used until the 1930s, and coincidence, that's when all these crazy schemes started coming up. I'm half Norwegian, and I like Norway because they took the word race clean out of their they replaced it with unfair discrimination. So they don't talk this race or that race. They just say don't do unfair discrimination. And I think the rest of the world's legal systems could take an from the Norwegian legal code in that regard, because racial has no meaning to a biologist. Let's say.
Yeah, I know it doesn't have any meaning to a biologist, but I hear what you're saying about the 1930s, and definitely that was a time of some world conflicts, just like some people say that we're in the middle of various world conflicts right now. But there was this notion even in the mid 1800s, and definitely in the early 1800s and the 1700s, when this particular country was being founded, about people that were considered not fully a person and all in that space. Because definitely while we say race doesn't exist, when you bring folks over from Africa and you declare them a 3/5 of a man, or you also have conversations around them as property, then that raises the other issues that goes on in that space as well. Because while there may have been conversation that race didn't exist, there were racial constraints that were going on even back in the early parts of the American founding, even in the way that we treated other people and all in that space. Like I said, there is the notion that China is to blame, or is their lab is to blame for the pandemic, but I don't think that is fair to blame an entire group, even if there are billions of folks that are part of that population and all along those lines. And we know that even here in America, the Asians, even before they were blamed for this, weren't exactly treated with great respect, even though they helped a lot with the building, and particularly out there in the West Coast, of the railroads, the highways, and a number of other things that were part of the gold rush and all along those lines. So they definitely helped in the building. So, whether it's ethnic pride or whether it's racial pride, because I definitely don't have a problem with people celebrating their heritage. One of our big events here in North Carolina that I didn't go to, haven't been to it in a couple of years, as the International Festival, where literally that's what it's called. And people from around the world celebrate their various cultures, whether that is French, Australian, German, Turkish, Ghanaian, a number of the other ones out there as well. And I know that I even probably could do a little less, even though I'm not getting any right now on this particular day, even though I'll probably have a late lunch or an early dinner. But I know that I even enjoy some what some people might consider ethnic food, whether that's Italian, Indian, or African American, or a number of other kind of dishes that can be quite delicious and all in that space. So definitely, and I have cousins that are uh, more involved on the native side of our family lineage, and they participate actively in the powwows. One of them actually sells native wear and native belts and native jewelry and all in that space. And another one, his sister, and actually a couple of his sisters, are very much involved in the powwow circuit and travel around both the United States and Canada competing in the powwows, and actually do quite well. I think they've won a couple of medals in like fancy dancing and some of the other categories in that space. So definitely, if folks are proud of that heritage, then I have no problem with them celebrating that heritage. And I even try to celebrate the various aspects of my own heritage as well. But definitely, that's one of the things that a lot of folks are probably thinking about, even as they are reflecting on the pandemic. And switching back to the pandemic, one thing I was curious about is, do you think that the schools are prepared? Because, a lot of times they were caught flat-footed, and I think that they are maybe more prepared now, since they have now got the notion of what to do with the kids once they are sent home. And also, a lot of online learning took place. A lot of things were prepared that are still going on in that space. So like I said, some of the schools that weren't as prepared from having done Zoom classes and other kinds of classes in the past, or having done virtual learning before the pandemic, are now more prepared. But I don't know that they are totally prepared. And, there is speculation that some of the kids themselves are suffering in terms of their own mental health, because we as people are social beings, and they've been away from their friends and family for it's not so much their family, but their friends for a number of years, and are concerned about what consequences that will have with their mental health. There have been a number of kids that have lashed out, whether that is physically with violence toward others, or even violence toward themselves, or even trying to take themselves out, and in terms of life and all in that space. And a lot of people are very concerned about the nature of what has happened to our kids, and whether, if they had to go back in, they would be prepared, whether they would live in here, or in Bangladesh, or in Brazil, or in a number of other places. But you are a researcher, among other things, including a candidate on the national side and all along those lines. But what are your thoughts about whether we are ready academically, should another pandemic have the misfortune of coming our way?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just to kind of close on the race discussion, composed. I mean, it's a handy catch-all, but it's really composed of ethnotype, genotype, and phenotype, and that's probably too big a discussion for this show. But yeah, I think this COVID experience is going to give us a certain amount of preparation for the next one. You said you got involved, not in the contact track and trace course that I did at Johns Hopkins. By the way, did you pay for that, or was it free?
It was free.
Yeah, I got the free one too. It's like $100 value or something. Like,
Right.
I had to sign up. It's like, oh, free stuff. No, I love certifications, especially if I don't have to pay that much for them. But yeah, I got involved in a maker movement to remember how we had the shortage of respirators. They were saying, oh, there's all these people and there's not enough respirators to go around. So a bunch of people in the makerspace movement were actually coming up with some really ingenious, simple designs that could be cranked out, be 3D printers, and use motors, and they weren't necessarily hospital grade, hospital approved, but in an emergency, you do what you have to do to save lives.
Oh yeah.
I think that's key. So we did see a lot of things, a lot of people stepping up. They used the Defense Production Act, I think,
Mhm.
to start making N95 men. And the same beat fascism in the 40s. We just said, hey, guess what, Ford? You're making bombers now. Guess what? You're making tanks now. And wow, suddenly we had full employment, and suddenly we had the arsenal of the army and a command economy that was able to just lick the problem. And that's amazing to be able to do that. I mean, I'm kind of envious of some of these command economies like China. Look how China lifted, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty to become, a world rivaling power and economy. Of course, there were, and bad actions along the way that should be brought up and reconciled for at some point. But every country has bad history. I mean, look at the genocide that happened to the indigenous people, and that was
Right.
most pandemic. It was like people weren't prepared for these alien, and even say the Revolutionary War of America was won because we were used to malaria, and these people coming over from England, they weren't seasoned soldiers because they had no resistance or resisted the malaria out in your neck of the woods there, where they were marching all over Georgia and the Carolinas, and it got to where I heard one-third Cornwallis's army couldn't even up. They were debilitated from the malaria mosquito interactions. So germs have played a big part in history. There's a book gets talked a lot about called Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond that puts together some of these historical convergences. But yeah, are we ready for the next pandemic? We are. I would have liked to have seen more what are called physical controls. We know violet light. There's a certain frequency of ultraviolet light. I think it's 420 nanometers. Anyway, don't fact check me on that. But we could these UV systems in all public doorways. So people are getting sterilized. The air is being sterilized continuously, and then we could do tracking and tracing like sampling the sewer systems. We do that. So I would like to see next time we have a pandemic, and it will come again. I mean, we've got all these what are called endemic diseases just waiting to pop up. Bird flu. They can zoonotic origin. They can jump species, and it's not a matter of if, but when. And
Right.
we need to be ready and use a scalpel instead of a bazooka.
Yeah.
Not do these. Okay, everyone has to shut down and stay home. That was like a lot of good company, and that was just a lot of school kids lost years off their learning, and it's just a shame the way we really dealt with the last pandemic. And now you've got all this vaccine hesitancy. You've got people denying that masks work. I mean, we know from the Spanish flu, which is misnamed from 1919, that there was a town that had a parade, and no one wore masks, and guess had like tens of thousands of casualties weeks later. And they had this other town where they wore masks or they canceled the public gatherings, and they saved tens of thousands of lives. So this data is, independently verifiable. I mean, there's people that think that or we never went to the moon, but you can't always reach the people that have shut their minds off to evidence. So save the people you can save.
Evidence can be a fascinating thing, and all along those lines, some people want to listen to the evidence, others don't. And like you mentioned, and that is where some people are afraid, even in this modern day era in the year of 2023, because even if you study that original pandemic that went on in the early 1900s, the one you were referring to, that is the misnamed Spanish flu, and all along those lines, there were shutdowns, I think, in that space as well, a number of shutdowns, and then they reopened it, and a couple of those reopened areas are what brought a resurgence. So when the pandemic was thought to be over, there was a resurgence, from my understanding of history. I think part of that even involved possibly the World Fair and some other major events that were going on and all along those lines. So I sometimes wonder, as we are reopening, we've now had 2 or 3 years of the NFL being back with fans, the NBA being back with fans, baseball being back with fans, and everything. Is there a danger of maybe having opened up too fast and there being a reoccurrence of some of the things that had already happened and in that space? So I do know that that is something people are concerned about. I don't know about in your circles, but I definitely enjoy being out. Was just out on 4th of July, so last week ago today, as well as on the 1st of July at a major festival. Lots of people out there enjoying themselves here in Durham, but I also have friends of mine that refuse to even go out because they are still fearful, and some of it is because of pre-existing conditions, but some of it is just fear that may not be justified fear. And all along those lines, I mean, we had a lot of people that are even wondering. I mean, some of the things that we should do are just common sense. Like, you are using the restroom or you're doing other things, you should be washing your hands in the first place and all along those lines. But then there are other things that were put out there, even nationally and internationally, and people are still, as you just said, debating the merits, whether that's the merits of the mask and the different types of masks, or whether that's the merits of 6 feet apart. Because definitely some people have said that that was a arbitrary distance that was picked in some of the studies that they have heard have talked about, that you literally need to be 10 feet apart if you're going to stop the spread of a cold germ or any other kind of germ that might be blown through the air circuits and the outside air and all in that space. And it's even probably different distance if you are inside, since there are different things that are taking place on the inside of a building versus on the outside in the natural elements and all along those lines. But like I said, I don't know if you got any thoughts around that, Daniel, because I did hear people that were like, well, why do we have to stay 6 feet apart? Why not 10 feet apart? Why not 20 feet apart? Why not a mile apart, or all along those lines? So, and I'm being very extreme when I say a mile, and particularly with billions of people in the world and everything. But what is your thoughts when there was this notion that you need to be 6 feet apart?
Well, we actually had Rob had Renderly weigh in on a show on that, where someone, I think it was the guy running for the Constitution Party, said, "Oh, what's the 6 feet? It's arbitrary." And Rob said, "No, actually, that was determined as far back as like the 1800s. That they had good evidence that that was a good calculation. And you're never going to get to zero risk, and you're never going to get to 100% risk. It's always a moving target in between those two. And everyone should be able to decide what their risk tolerance is and what their agency is to determine that. You're free to drive a car, but you're not free to get in a car blind drunk and go kill a family, by mowing them down. And that's what some people said. Well, if you're said in public without a mask, you're kind of like driving drunk there. It's like it's not something that should be in your personal freedom choice. So that's what kind of goes down to what are called lifeboat ethics. If you end up on a lifeboat because your ship sank and you don't know when you're going to get rescued, and there's a bunch of rations and a bunch of people that need to stay alive as long as possible, then you have to go to something that looks authoritarianism. You got one guy who's the captain and he's got a gun, and what he says goes, or you go. And we want to avoid those kind of situations, but we want to realize they become city, and be, I don't know how you for lifeboat ethics. Maybe that's why we read science fiction or cautionary tales in fiction, and why we have people brainstorming about things. But yeah, we need to not always follow the herd. Because following the herd works most of the time, but when the herd is plunging off a cliff, you better think for yourself. Most people don't make drastic changes until they're forced to. They're content not to worry about something because, I'll worry about it as it happens. Cross that bridge when I come to it. But I think 10% of the population does have that proactive planning, advanced cautionary kind of, the people that are got 6 months or a year worth of food piled up, and they've got their bunkers ready for the power goes 6 months, and there's people looting and shooting and this awful stuff. Are those people extreme? Well, we won't know until it happens. People actually are kinder when big disasters happen. Everyone thinks we're all going to become like cornered rats, but there's a book called A Paradise Built in Hell, and it shows all these case histories of where things became really bad, but people became really good in response.
One of the other things that happens with plagues is that sometimes one plague leads to another plague or another outbreak. I want to say that way back when, and I was nowhere near the earth when this happened and everything, but I want to say that when the bubonic plague took place, that there were other things that came about after the bubonic plague and all along those lines. And there are some people that would argue that we are in the midst of that right now. So while we are getting out of the pandemic and coronavirus is supposedly, on the downslide and all in that space, there are other older diseases that have been around forever. Some would say that they are sexually transmitted diseases that apparently are massively on the rise. So I was reading earlier today that apparently syphilis is rising around the world. There are definitely major cases on the rise in Switzerland. There are cases in Virginia that has jumped to its highest level in 30 years and all in that space. So sometimes if folks are getting out of one bad situation health-wise, they might be jumping into another one. So it does seem like this is a issue that has been going on, because I know that there were articles about this as early as 2022 and maybe even before that and everything. So just wondering your thoughts about how sometimes when there is a pandemic, maybe people are rushing for shared relationships or whatever. Who knows why the syphilis rates are up and all in that space, but it does seem like that is a worldwide issue, because I just mentioned Switzerland, but I've heard that it is definitely taking place in various parts of the world as well. So any thoughts about how sometimes when one thing stops, another thing may rise that might be, I won't say as bad, but it has its consequences as well?
Yeah, well, we think we go to the hospital to get well, right?
Right.
But if you look at hotbeds of very problematic things, my friend right now is just he's not responsive, and he's got MRSA. I don't know if you've heard of MRSA, MRSA infections. It stands for methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, and it's something that is so hard to treat because we've really gone through our arsenal of antibiotics, and the bacteria have mutated to become, resistant to our trying to treat them with that. So this is things that are spread in hospitals, healthcare facilities, even in the community where you live, go to school. You could pick up these resistant kinds of bugs. So that's something that's got to be talked about. And I would just put in a good word for suppress medical therapeutic, which there are many, and there are also reasons for big pharma and big medicine to keep them suppressed because there's no money in them usually. But things like elemental silver has been used, and it can't be patented. You can't make patent it, but it has a built-in kind of antibacterial property. That's why they put like a silver dollar in the water barrel when they were crossing the prairies back in the Oregon Trail, because the water from getting spoiled. Hold on a second, I got a cough.
Yeah, go ahead. Get the cough out. Gotta definitely get the cough out. But
yeah, I hope this isn't COVID. I've been fighting something for about a week here, and now I gave it to my roommate. It's kind of a problem, but I had a good run, like a couple of years without it. And it's the same with the vaccines. I think what you're often doing is creating resistant mutation. Because remember how they said, oh, there's the Omicron variant, we got a new vaccine for that. Oh, there's this variant, we got a vaccine for that. And I think what's that was actually doing was creating these pools of mutating substrains that are just going to create create taste here. You're never going to get an someone said if we could just stop you know uh, sneezing on each other for 2 weeks, we might have stopped the COVID thing cold. But I think it depends on how long it lives on cells and how well we're disinfecting things. So
Not only
um,
that, but like I said, we're very social beings. We love being out in social environments. I mean, the average worker is in a cubicle environment and oftentimes is associated with various other employees. I don't care what field they're in. Even earlier today, or maybe that was yesterday, I was looking at some people that were doing construction. So they were out in the hot elements and they were doing construction on a tall building, and I could see from afar because I wasn't near them. They were probably a couple of miles away, but I could still see because they were up in the air and everything that they were working closely together. Now, might have only been three of them, but they were up there in that space and everything. And if one of them had a cold while they were up there, I'm sure the other two or three would catch that cold as well because they were working in close conjunction with each other. So I don't know that we're ever going to be in a kind of that boy in the tent kind of environment where everybody is in a tent that is, you know, sealed in that kind of space. I don't know that I would want to work in that kind of environment. As a matter of fact, I know I wouldn't want to work in that kind of environment. But in some ways, we all became working in that kind of environment during the pandemic because a lot of us were sealed in our houses because we were told to stay sheltered inside. But even that doesn't always work because a lot of people were running into issues with their family dynamics. How many of us have heard of the people that were living together during the pandemic, and because they were more in contact with each other than they would have been if they were going to their separate jobs and then coming back to their homes and everything, wound up heading to the divorce or the separation court because they found out that they didn't like each other as well as they thought they did because they were actually there in each other's company on a regular basis. And that just wasn't couples, that was also roommate situations, that was also even parents and their kids and a number of others, because it's not like if the governments of the world told you to go home and stay home that you had any choice in the matter. So you were there in a confined environment with your loved ones, or at least those that were perceived to be your loved ones, and then you might find out that there wasn't as much love as you thought there was in those situations and all along those lines. So that's another consequence of the pandemic that people oftentimes don't think about. I know that there was a fear that there might be a rise in the birth rate during the pandemic, and I don't know that that has played out. I haven't studied the figures to see if that has played out, and all along those lines. The other thing that took place is that some institutions that were struggling may have found a way to bring new people into their fold and everything. Because even before the pandemic, churches were struggling, but then a lot of people started going to church in a more relaxed environment. And even what you just mentioned with schools, they started going to schools in a more relaxed environment. So there were people that literally were getting second and third and fourth degrees or different certifications that might not have done that before. And I'm thinking that some church attendances may have gone up because the people were told not to go to the church service, and some of the people might not have even wanted to go to the church service, but they didn't mind watching the service on a YouTube or a Facebook Live or a number of other things that can take place in that space. So I'd be curious to find out, and I haven't seen any concrete studies if we didn't see some of these institutions actually take a bump instead of a decline, and it'd be interesting to see what happened in that regards as well.
Yeah, kind of like the big plague in the Middle Ages. It killed a third of the population in pop. So all this wealth, so distributed, all this land was opened up, and that's a factor that isn't really that it count. Like you said about the birth rate going up because they thought, oh, everyone's gonna be at home, they'll be at home, making the wild thing, and making babies, and that did actually happen in the New York 1965 blackout, where I think New York was black for a day or two, and there was 9 months of wow, look at this, there's all these babies being But
Jason and I don't have control, but I'm reading the comments. But and since I don't have the controls, I can just repeat them. But Jason Geringer, who I know is a regular as well, said, "Sup, Big Dan Twit." So he was saying hello to you and all along those lines. And I
hey, he's a
definitely
great legislative director.
he did my hip voice and everything, and he said how to stop the next pandemic, vaccines, and he was asking that in question marks and all along those lines. So I guess he's asking us if we think that vaccines, but that is a preventive measure, and actually usually it's after the fact and everything. So if we don't know where the pandemic is coming from, I don't know that a vaccine is going to stop it until you know where it is coming from, unless you can guess the nature of the next pandemic. I mean, you can definitely stop the existing pandemics from growing. We've definitely seen that with some of the things that have consistently happened. Like, most people, if they are of a certain age, have had their smallpox shots, which used to be a major issue back in the day, and definitely the flu shot. And I know a lot of people are taking their shots even for the coronavirus and all in that space. But then you've got other folks that are concerned about the need to take it on a regular basis. So I do know some folks that took the initial couple of shots and then have not, to your point of vaccine hesitancy, not rushed to get the other ones because they're not sure that the booster is actually boosting anything and all in that space. So definitely there is all of those various concerns, but I guess part of that is the predictive model. And I don't know that there is enough research that has been done to figure out what the next pandemic will be, where it'll come from. I mean, like I said, this was supposed to have been done from some research. I know Wuhan has been mentioned. I think some animal research was mentioned as well. I mean, for all we know, I don't know if you have any cats or dogs, but your cat or dog could be the next cause of the next pandemic, Reverend Daniel. I mean, you might go outside, stumble across something, bring it to you, and then the next thing I know, you are the next Typhoon Mary, if I can use that expression, and all along those lines. So we don't know where it will come from or whether it'll come from an outside source or how it will be even spread. I mean, it could be somebody that's on a cruise and the cruise could catch something and then they come back home and it spreads, because there was some of that that was said to have happened even during this pandemic, where people came back after they had gone on a cruise. Maybe they picked it up on the cruise and didn't know they had it until they came back home, and then it spread to other parts of the country. Because I even want to say that is how they said it got to certain parts of the United States, where people haven't traveled, whether that was a cruise or ship or whatever, and then they came back and maybe weren't tested enough. I mean, what do? We test people as soon as they get back on the airports and the cruise lines and say to, make sure they are of a clean bill of health. And I don't know, the people that are for civil liberties, and I'm definitely for civil liberties, would really want us to put people in, lack of a better term, a quarantine kind of environment before we let them back into the country. So let's just say you went for a cruise, and this is a hypothetical. You went for a cruise, and the cruise was for a week. Do we then, if we're doing overly assertive in our protection, do we then say that you have to stay home for another week until you are cleared of anything that you may have picked up? And will your employees let you do that? Because most employees are not going to let you. I mean, it's hard enough getting a week's vacation. Try telling your boss that you want to basically amount to taking a 2 or 3 week vacation, and he might tell you, well, if that's the case, I don't know that you got a job.
Well, you're starting that lifeboat ethics. Like, how many rights do people have to surrender in order to save lives? And I think you have to be evidence. There's people that go, well, what happened to all the flu deaths during COVID? Suddenly, every deaths, the flu deaths were zero. I think you can make a case. You can make a lot of misattribution of mortality causes going. And sometimes, when a disease affects a population, has a natural rise and fall kind of curve. And it's easy for someone to come in and say, oh, come and fall, that was definitely the vaccine. No, causation is not, or correlation is not always causation, is an important topic when you're looking at evidence and public health. So you got to also look, these big pharma companies, they got an awful big transfer of wealth to them that was kind of a big giveaway by the public. And And big pharma have a good record. They've actually been fined. $35 billion is what they paid in just fines that's violated over the past 10 years. I don't think any other industry comes close to that kind of liability, fine, penalty payment, and that's the stuff we know about. But the good effect from COVID was we got this amazing, RNA technology development, where we can we've cracked the code on our specific delivery vehicles for vaccines. But I think the jury is not entirely on the vaccine evidence. We looked at pro and con and weighed, risk benefit. Instead of just automatically assuming, oh, it's a silver bullet, just do whatever you need to. Everyone use the silver bullet. I think Americans are kind of to have this one size fits all silver bullet panacea kind of outlook toward technology, and
Yeah.
that's something we need. That's re-examine. Skeptical of.
No, definitely. And you actually bring a good point in there, Reverend Daniel, which is the notion of whether it's this pandemic or the next pandemic, how much are the government forces and the lobbies to play a role as well? Because there are a number of people that were wondering, even in this case, not just here in the United States, but around the world, how much did the government play into the narrative, and are they prepared next time around, and should they be making some of those decisions that they chose to make? There were a number of people that were afraid that the countries locked down too soon, and there were some countries that did not lock down as quickly, and some that opened up faster, including some that were quote unquote not first world countries, but they seem to have had a better result because they were better prepared in the sense of how they handled it. And some people would say it's because they had less of a concentration of people, because some of these countries are smaller nations and all in that space. But that is something that folks would probably be wondering about, and all along those lines. And the same with the lobbyists. I mean, like you just mentioned, Reverend Daniel, how much of what is going on because of the corporate greed and the corporate wealth and all in that space. So definitely there was a rush to find a vaccine. It's like there was an arms race with the nuclear power plants. So I would argue there was a vaccine race that involved some major players. Now, whether those vaccines are as effective and whether one is better than the other, the course of time will determine that, whether Moderna was better or Pfizer or some of the other ones that are out there. But there was definitely a race to find the fastest cure. And, sometimes when you race to find things, you don't always do it effectively. There have been numerous cases where people have raced to find something and have done shortcuts that can be harmful in the long run. And I'm not saying that necessarily is the case in this particular situation, because we all needed to get the vaccines, and best I can tell, they have been successful. But that doesn't mean that down the line, 5-10 years from now, we might find that Sharif and you are growing rabbit ears because of the vaccine and all along those lines, and we won't know it until after it has happened and all in that space. Doubt that will be the case, but that is the fear that some folks may have, just because of the quickness to want to find something, and did we do it too quickly and all along those lines. Like I said, I definitely have my initial shots and definitely was glad to have them. I think I'm overdue for a booster or two, but definitely I think that the vaccine is vital and all in that important space. I've had relatives, including a very dear one, my dad, that just recently had it, but it was the mild version. And part of the reason of having the mild version is because he had the shot and doesn't have, even though he's in his 80s, that many pre-existing conditions. So, like I said, and he is very healthy, probably more healthy than I am in terms of exercise and some of the other things that they ask us to do. Because that's the other thing, is that I think it brought people a greater awareness of various aspects of our health, not just our physical health, but our mental, emotional, and in a lot of ways, even our spiritual health as well, because everybody was worried about their mortality, for lack of a better term, and all in that space. So definitely it is raised a number of things that folks are thinking about on a regular basis. Hey, Dr. Sharif, me and Reverend Daniel have been going back and forth. I hope that we're giving your listeners some insights into the thoughts and whether another pandemic could happen or not. But just out of curiosity, you're in Bangladesh. Your students are all over the world. I alluded to Brazil earlier and everything, and I know that they've got some health concerns, including being a crowded country. But are your students fearful that we might get another pandemic? Are you fearful of that as well? Me and Daniel have been going back and forth for about 50 minutes, and you're the one to pick this topic. So, what are your students telling you are their fears and everything, or are they thinking this was a one time event in their lifetime?
Yeah, definitely. This pandemic give us the great lesson, and we have to learn that anything may happen, and we need to prepare ourselves. So that's why we organizing these things, and hopefully through this dialogue we can get some solutions, and the solution can be helpful for the global community. That is the objective of today's communities, and our students always, as we developing business incubations, so our students always love to bring new idea and new solution for the community. So we are happy to provide any kind of solution for the next pandemic. That is the things we are thinking right now. Thank you for your question.
Oh, no problem. I
Yeah.
was wondering if the students had any solutions because I know that sometimes some of the best solutions actually come from the minds of our students, whether that is the students here in the United States or the students around the globe. So I just was curious if any of your students have told you privately or even publicly any thoughts of what they wish to happen. Like, were they, because I know a lot of students were not glad about the shutdowns because that means that you can't go to a party. And students love parties. Let's be honest. Students love a good party and everything. So a lot of the students were probably going like, wait, I can't go to my latest party, whether it's in Bangladesh or in Brazil or in Kenya, just to name three countries and everything. So what are your, and some of the students were frustrated by the mask and all of that space because they like to see their fellow students' faces and you can't see that really all that well in a mask. And a lot of students are in that dating era, so they really want to see the face of their potential mate and all in that space. So I just wondered if your what your students were telling you in your conversations with them, Dr. Sharif.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, like I have a tour after 4 5 hours. I have a tour, and then I'm visiting another university and follow up the business incubations. So hopefully, this kind of dialogue create more awareness, and they can take many protective measure for solving the next pandemic. And when I finish my visit to this business incubation, this is very far from my place. So that time, maybe I have a better understanding what type of solution they made in their business incubation for Bangladesh.
Yep, that makes sense. And just around
Yeah.
the world. Hey, Reverend Daniel, I
Yes.
know that we're here to wrap up because definitely Dr. Sharif is getting ready to end this out, this show. We all you go about an hour along those lines. But how do you think you would have felt? Because I know that even now, and I'm 61 and single, and even now it's hard to see the person's face and get an idea when they are masked up. And many folks are still masked up, even though there are a number of folks that are out and about exposing their entire face and all along those lines. But I was just wondering in your neck of the world whether that was something that frustrated you when you maybe were trying to even do business deals or even trying to pastor to these folks as well. So I just wondering your thoughts about the interconnection with individuals when they are hidden underneath the mask.
Well, I would take another tack on the mask question. Do you remember when there weren't enough masks to go around, and the
Yep.
government was saying, "Well, don't worry about the masks." And then when there were enough to go around, they changed the policy. It's like, "Oh yeah, masks are actually a good idea," but it's like they were changing masks to fit the fact that whether there were enough masks or not enough masks. Just, like remember the toilet paper run where everyone thought there's
Right.
going to be they didn't want to create a run on masks and then everyone would be and there wouldn't be enough for the medical profession really needed them. So we have evidence the government will filter and modify their policies on stuff that they don't necessarily want to come out and admit it at first. And they did come out later and say, well, yeah, that was out. but we did it for good reasons because we
No,
didn't.
we definitely did for good reason. I got another flip for you really quickly, and then I'll set it over. Dr. Sharif's getting ready to end everything very shortly. But the other flip that took place, and I brought it up on this show as well as other shows that I've been part of, is that what is one of the number one things that we complain around the world about? It is no doubt that one of the things we complain about is the climate and the environment. And part of what we complain about the environment is pollution. And it is, I have no statistical things to back me up, just my personal observation, but I would argue that the biggest pollution item right now is exactly what we're talking about. Because how often, whether it's where you are in Bangladesh, Dr. Sharif, I know that literally I can go outside today and go by the bus stop and I'll probably find 10 to 15. And I know that you are, Reverend Daniel. There are probably several that are laying around because most people don't know what to do with the mask. You know, their trash can's right there. So the mask winds up on the floor or on the ground. That seems to me that would be a big pollution issue. And all along those lines, because it is, one, it's got the germs of whatever you breathe in, and two, it's laying right there on the ground. So it seems to me that that is both a health risk and a pollution risk. And like I said, I don't have statistical factation, just the or statistical facts, just what I have personally observed. I was wondering if you've observed the same thing, Reverend Daniel and Dr. Sharif, because I can't tell you how many times I've run across a mask, including right there on the bus that we alluded to earlier, literally sitting there on the bus floor, as well as on the ground here in Durham, North Carolina, Raleigh, and some of the other cities that I have visited.
And spoke about the shortwave light. If we had rolled out more of those, we could have sterilized more things like used masks. But yeah, I mean, but a dormant virus on the ground is not going to jump up by itself and run down your nose. I mean,
Right.
it has to be propelled by coughing, sneezing, breathing. So you have to factor in, transport happens. I mean, we're really lucky that it wasn't mosquito borne. I don't know why it wasn't mosquito borne. You'd think it would be, but I think
You say, Daniel, you say that, but it's summertime. How many people right now are walking in the summer on barefoot or with moccasins or with other smaller type of feet and everything? And I hear what you're saying about the germs jumping up at you and everything. But if you step on a mask and you're not paying attention to the mask, it seems to me that that germ can just as fast enter your feet as it can from the nose and everything. And like I said, I am not a scientist. Don't even pretend to play one on TV and everything, but that to me seems like that would be an issue, because how often do you walk down the street and you don't pay attention to what you stepped on, and all in that space? And if there are all those masks laying down, there's a good chance that you can step on one, particularly if you are running barefooted or walking barefooted or all along those lines. So like I said, I'm not a scientist, so the scientists that are listening, if y'all want to correct me, please do correct me. I don't claim to be a scientist. I don't even play one on TV. Mark might be in my name, but I would never Marcus Welby.
Well, I'm
Thank
old
you.
enough to. I remember the Apollo 11 astronauts, and I don't know if you remember, came back from the moon. They had to be in a quarantine because they're wait. What if they brought back some strange moon virus? But it's kind of funny because they walked, out in the open air, the helicopter, and into the little, GMC trailer, and it's like, well, the moon virus could have. It's like a lot of the appearance of safety. And that's good enough because, like I said, you can't get to 100%. We don't want to make the perfect the enemy of the good. Sometimes you have to settle for the good.
Hey, Dr. Sharif, and then I'm gonna let you ride straight up because it's all about your show and everything. But guess what? A thing that I learned, and I don't know if Reverend Daniel knew this as well, but there is no air that blows in the moon or any place else. So one of the things that I just recently read, it was actually on a quiz that I do on the phone that is all along those lines, is technically speaking, Mr. Armstrong's footprint on the moon is still there because there is no wind that circulates. So that footprint is still technically there on the moon because the moon doesn't have any wind that blows around. So if the next person that goes up there, maybe it'll be Elon Musk. If he looks carefully enough, he can probably still find Mr. Armstrong and the rest of the team, Buzz Aldrich, and the rest of their footprints literally laying there because there's no wind. So even though that was 40, 50 years ago, it is still there at this particular time and everything because there's been no wind for all those years. Am I not correct, Reverend Daniel? At least that's what I read recently.
Well, yeah, other than micrometeoroid impacts or larger impacts, yeah, it's a vacuum on the moon. And so, yeah, it'll be there potentially undisturbed for as long as the moon is undisturbed. But the sun is getting bigger and hotter, so the solar system's not permanent either.
Right. So me and
Thank
Reverend
you.
Danny have
Thank
enjoyed
you.
going back and forth. I'm tossing it to you, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's sessions. Thank you, all of our audience, those who joined today's session. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible. Thank you. Bye bye and take care.
Thank you.